Share my
So
screen.
Eric, once again, thank you very much for accepting the invite to be here today. It's Thursday, 6 p.m. Probably time to go to the pub. I don't know if pubs are already
No, they're not
looking.
open
Not yet.
yet.
Okay.
No, no. So at the end of the month, they will reopen.
Oh my
So,
God.
Mike, you can imagine what it does on the culture.
So countdown started. Okay, just start a timer, a web page or whatever
Okay.
until all the pubs are open again. All right. So, but again, welcome. And I guess we'll have a lot of attention today to your presentation because design thinking in strategy is something that people want to learn more about. And I'm also curious about translators without borders because I guess it's done for profit.
Yeah.
So having a profit is not your goal, is not the ambition of that organization. And I'm curious about how design thinking, how strategy can help translators without borders. And I guess we all are. Okay, so over to you. The floor is yours, Eric.
All right. Thanks, Hugo. And people, like, I'm not monitoring the chat because I don't see it at the moment on my screen. So if you have any
I will do
questions,
that. I will do
okay.
that.
So if there's any questions, you can feel free to interrupt, or we can have a chat at the end. Um, so yeah, so just as an intro, just talk a little bit about Translators Without Borders, do my selling pitch there, and then selling for a nonprofit, and then I'll move into the presentation as such, and then introduce myself properly at that stage. So Translator Without Borders, our mission is to work towards a world where knowledge knows no language barriers. And what it really means for us is that we're investing a lot in language technologies to be able to share information and education in as many languages as we can, but especially for the marginalized languages and populations. So think of refugee camps, think of regions where the language is spoken but not necessarily written, areas where people have very low access to technologies. So we provide, we're actually, what we do, we're the link, underground link, communication link between all the other humanitarian agencies that go on the ground to work and the populations. So we provide translation, like as a basis. We were created to provide translation, hence the name, but we moved towards investing in language technologies more holistically. So we're looking at machine translation models for marginalized languages or low resource languages. We're looking at chatbot and IVR. So we're using existing technologies and repurposing them to be used in low resource languages. And we're trying to build language translation capacities also at local level, so we can train people that are on the ground, like that are from the region, from the area, to be translators for us. And also our goal is to kind of provide that message globally as well, how language is important. So how does it link with the Innovation Cafe? Well, as we're talking about design thinking today, I mean, if you want wicked problems, we have plenty of those. How do you kind of give out, use language technologies with the population segment that has no access to technology is an interesting challenge. The innovation side, so we're trying to innovate in language technologies, like I said, by not necessarily groundbreaking innovation, but by kind of applying new thinking to existing technology or repurposing existing technologies for our needs. As a humanitarian organization, a lot of our approach, whether it's for the technology side or even to the assessment side of the needs on the ground, we've been using a human-centered approach to tackle, like I said, most of our challenges. And then there's the funding and fundraising models that it's probably feel like a startup where we always be looking for funding and fundraising to fund. So in times of crisis like this, that's when there's usually the humanitarian organization get funding for operating in those situations. So that's when we get maybe more access to funding. But there's always a challenge because they don't necessarily fund the tech research part. They just would fund our activities on the ground or helping the other partner organizations. So we're always on the lookout for funding and fundraising. So if you want to pass the message, and you can see all our details on our website, translatorswithoutborders.org, or follow us on the different social media. So that was the Translators Without Borders bit. Now let's jump into the more fun part of the presentation, the design thinking side. So originally I was talking, I did the presentation for a UX conference, UXPA, and so I created that slide, and it kind of generated in the audience kind of some laughter and get the energy up. So I don't know how it works digitally now doing presentation remotely, but I'll use it to introduce myself. So I'm the Chief Technology Officer in Translators Without Borders. And so my background has been in tech mostly, or in tech for the last 20, 30 years nearly now. So I started my career with a few little startups in Canada. Then I moved into Ireland where I worked for 2 years in localization for a graphic company, Corel. So I don't know, for the old timers on the call there, they might recall CorelDRAW and PhotoPaint, and that were alternatives to Adobe. Actually, they were bigger than Adobe at the time. And then I served a life sentence in Microsoft. So I spent 17 years in Microsoft in various roles there. One of the roles I had, I was part of the team who implemented scenario focused engineering, which was the design thinking brand of Microsoft. Then I moved on to DAP Center, and which is a research center in artificial intelligence, and then finally landed in TWB, which is Translators Without Borders. So that's about me. When I created that presentation, or I looked into the research, I'd been attending a conference where the key message was around speed. So the ability to innovate at speed, prototype at speed, to like do everything fast, to be able to compete in your market, in your segments. And as presentations were going on, I said, yeah, that's great. Yeah, that's where we have to go, until someone came and put that quote on a slide. And that got me thinking. So yes, speed is important, but if you're going the wrong direction, it's probably not helping if you're going there fast. So I said, how can you kind of reconciliate the two? So that's where kind of my research kind of started with. So how can we use design thinking methods to kind of keep the speed, but identify the direction quickly enough so you're not going into the wrong direction for too long if you need to course correct. So move from a 5 years, let's say, kind of strategy to kind of an evolving strategy that can course correct as needed. There'll be 3 kind of parts, and I'm going to make assumptions in order to be able to kind of get through it fairly quickly. We already had a good presentation at the beginning of I think it was the first session of the cafe, actually, was on design thinking. And I'm going to assume that you know quite a good bit about design thinking, and I'm going to try to move to the understanding of it quickly. And then I'll talk a bit more about the research I did. So maybe, sorry, I didn't say that in the introduction, but yeah, I did a master's degree in product management, and the focus was on design thinking for strategy. And that's kind of what I was presenting here, was kind of the result of the research I did and what I've learned throughout the whole research. So I'm gonna talk about how I can use design thinking for strategy making, and then I'm gonna jump into kind of tips and tools of the trade. So what is design thinking? So what it's kind of a methodology that has many kind of brands or models. So we can look at the academic side where there's Stanford, like the D School in Stanford, or the Darden School of Business that have their own model as well. And then you can look at the kind of commercial design thinking firm. IDEO is probably the original one, or the one that kind of commercialized design thinking. And then there's the kind of the consultancy aspect, and there the six models I looked when I was doing my research. So then the three kind of consultancy aspect of, like, this one, the Accenture, there's IBM, the Loop, and the SAP Design as well is another one. I was actually surprised when I started digging into those different models to see IBM in the mix. I wasn't seeing IBM as a design company, but by talking to people in the design group and other people in IBM, I realized that actually it's probably one of the biggest design company, because they've implemented their own kind of flavor of design thinking, but they actually went and proceeded at training the entire company on design thinking, which is kind of quite a feat. And I'll talk about that a little bit later. So just to kind of move quickly on design thinking, I looked at the background and where it all started. So it kind of started in the mid 70s in design engineering, and kind of the original like 5 steps of or stages of design that were identified in design engineering probably will sound familiar. So there were the building blocks, I think, of design thinking. And so what I did then is I layered those 6 models with those original design stage, and kind of see where they match. So like you can think of IDEO's kind of 3-prong approach of inspiration, ideation, implementation, or go like with more like the D School model that mapped actually quite closely to what the design stages of design engineering were. And that's kind of the background research I did around the various flavor of design thinking. So I also looked at how like it links into business models, into open innovation. There was, I think that one of the big lack was, as design thinking was emerging, is that the companies were lacking, organizations were lacking to exploring new knowledge. So they were kind of stuck into their own business model, and they weren't really looking outside. And then with the arrival of design thinking, they applied like the outside in thinking, the open innovation models. And then you saw various business model emerging from there, whether B2B, B2C. People start talking about like the Uber business model, the Airbnb model. So that there was various kind of business model emerging. So that kind of got me thinking, and how we can apply that into strategy. So if you're familiar with design thinking, you'd be familiar with the design ladder from the Danish Design Center, which they identify kind of 4 levels of design in organizations. The first one is an organization that no actually design methods or design processes implemented in their organization. And then you move up to using design as styling, so more as aesthetic and kind of designing your product, as in how does it look and the look and feel. And then you talk about design as process, so that you put kind of, you include design in your process, and finally kind of have a design strategy in your organization. So I kind of thought there was an extra layer there where you could kind of push a little bit further and kind of use design to develop your strategy and apply the same thinking while you think about strategy. So when I went about then to do the research, I did some pilot project with a UX consultancy firm in Canada, and then I talked to various kind of executive in big organizations. I talked to some of the consultancy firm client. And then I talked to some design thinking firms as well, and kind of took all that information and kind of looked at how, what were the barriers to adoption and how kind of people are reacting to that. So kind of the first thing kind of I was trying to look at how I would describe experience-led strategy or design thinking-led strategy. So I started at the very basic. I looked at the Oxford Dictionary for the definition of design and the definition of strategy. So design kind of always refers as around the art of the action of conceiving a plan. And then strategy is a plan of action. So there's a clear link between the two when you look at just a basic definition. And Herbert Simon also came up with a kind of a design a definition there where everyone designs or devises courses of action. So there's a lot of focus around action. So for me, experience-led strategy is setting the action setting stage for your strategy. So that's where it all comes together. So what did the research say? So as part of a different piece of research, there was, we asked 100 executives that had innovation in their title about the frameworks they wanted that they believed in and wanted to kind of implement in their organization. Unsurprisingly, design thinking came at the top, and you can see that like very closely behind agile is there. There's human-centered design. There's a lot of process that we're familiar with that came up. But then there was, I suppose, a little bit biased because there were executives that are operating in the world of innovation. We also asked the same executive what their CEO think of them, which was quite interesting. I've highlighted a few, like the guy who pops with the cool ideas once in a while, ask too many questions and don't provide enough answers. So that they're kind of the view the CEOs or kind of leadership teams would have maybe of the innovation team or the innovation guy sometimes in an organization. And one of the reasons why maybe there's this perception, I think, is because organizations would typically kind of use the strategy as a kind of a direct line to achieve a vision. And what does it take then as part of the strategy? There's an innovation side and over time and to execute on the vision. But I guess we're kind of all familiar with the process of innovation. Kind of looks a bit more like this, a bit messy at the beginning, and eventually you can see a bit of direction emerging to achieve that. So I thought, okay, so if you look at that and then you look at how people see kind of their strategy, maybe we should put that kind of in perspective and have a messy beginning to your strategy until kind of it clarifies a bit to achieve your vision. So I started looking at different tools. Kotter back in 1995 had kind of developed 8 steps to transform your organization. And I tried to see how does that map to kind of design thinking and what can we do around that. So if you walk through the 8 stage, like there's the empathy, like the establishing a sense of urgency and understanding why you need to transform your organization. There was a people aspect that you need to form like a coalition. So you need to surround yourself with people that will help you kind of devise your strategy. You have to create a vision if you want to attain it. And that's where I saw like there's a good place for using ideation techniques. Communication played a big role. It goes back to empathy, like when you want to understand others while also empowering them to act on your vision. And then there's a business model access aspect, then into kind of iteration phase where you can consolidate, improve, and it kind of then produce more change around your strategy, and then essentially absorb all those changes. So I kind of through kind of looking at all that, I came up with actually 5 stages for design-led strategy. So there's the people side, the problem framing, the business model, the vision, and the communications. And how I kind of visualized it then, and I started kind of running that model with a few executive and clients, and people. It's not perfect. It's not the prettiest graphic, but it's to see that the strategy as a spiral that would grow over time through going through all the problem framing, the strategic vision, the business model, and as you ideate and iterate on your strategy, it keeps growing. So it's not a fixed plan, but it's more kind of an evolving plan that grows with your organization. And the key part then is what surrounds all that is the communication and the people. So that was kind of the theoretical aspect of the research. And then I kind of dove into more like, okay, what actually works and what doesn't work, and why doesn't it work? So I think that the first one is kind of around the misconceptions and the barriers to adoption. And the biggest barrier there when I was talking to people is the misconception about design. So when you talked about design, and that's why I started talking about experience-led strategy instead of design thinking-led strategies, because when you use the word design, people see it as aesthetic. So design as form, and it's probably your first barrier when you talk to leadership teams. It's going to go beyond the aesthetic. One of the other kind of barrier to adoption was kind of the lack of business outcome. So they see design thinking as, oh yeah, you get a brainstorming, put loads of post-it on the wall, but then you can too often those brainstorming sessions lack of direction, and so people kind of walk out highly energized with loads of ideas, but there's no clear next step, and they don't really know what they're going to do with all that. So they had fun for an hour, for half a day, but they don't see clear value or business outcomes if it's not directed properly. The other thing as well is sometimes you, like either leadership team or leaders would go to a design thinking workshop or a presentation day or presentation is let's do design thinking, but it actually creates a disconnect within the organization because all of a sudden they use a different language around concepts, and people kind of don't necessarily follow along what they're saying. And so yeah, someone's just been in a workshop and using the new buzzwords, but nothing's going to happen out of it. So how can you actually kind of go past those barriers and use kind of design thinking tools to build your strategy? So there are the 5 kind of areas that I looked at: building the right team, look at problem framing activities, canvases, design sprints, workshops. They're all kind of different design thinking tools that you can use and look at when you're working with leadership teams to work on strategy. Building the right team is actually very important. So I think that the leadership team cannot work on isolation on their strategy. They need to include people from all different parts of the organization. And I think that's one of the key parts. It's to work across the whole organization as you're working on your strategy, instead of coming with a strategy and then trying to push it down the organization. And one of the examples that I came across working with a consultancy company is that they were doing user experience, but they're also kind of starting to work more with leadership teams on strategy. And one of the gains there is that as they were working for their 5-year plan and all that, they decided like maybe that's not the approach to take, and they started bringing people from around the organization. It was their client was a transport company, public transport company, and it was highly unionized. So what they did is actually brought people from all levels from the unions as well as they were going to strategy. And what it meant is that when they rolled out their plan and their vision, it was already bought in by all those different teams in the organization. So there was very little friction. And I mean, if you've ever worked with unionized organization, when you build change or you introduce change, there's very often there's friction with the unions. And this time, that client was known for in the past for having had a lot of friction. So that actually smoothed the process over and worked quite well for them. And then I talked about canvases as well. And there's always, like when you start with the blank canvas, sometimes it's very hard to get direction and you don't really know how to approach this. That's how I see kind of the various canvases that are available to evolve your strategy. So, but I'm saying, like, some people want to kind of be great and take a blank canvas and they can draw something really quickly and really well. But if you're like me, I sometimes need a little bit more guidance. So to get to a pretty picture. I came across a quote that was quite interesting when I was looking at canvases, because I always kind of thought it would kind of reduce your kind of put boundaries on your thinking. But I came across that quote, it kind of resonated with me. So before you can think out of the box, you have to start with the box. And I think that's what the canvases does. It kind of gives you direction and kind of a model to follow, but it doesn't stop with the canvas, but at least it frames your thinking and your way forward. I looked at many canvases, and I think the one thing here I wanted to say is that there's none that are better than others, and you could spend many projects, many prototype or iteration of your strategy using different canvas, and they would probably yield different results. But I think familiarize yourself with one, pick one that you actually like. I think, I mean, there's the business model canvas, there's the innovators canvas. There's one called Destroy Your Business, which is based on the experiment that they did in General Electric with Jack Welch, where he asked all the different GE businesses to see how they could compete with themselves. So what would destroy their business if it came? So they're kind of taking a different outside-in approach there. I like the lean canvas, but because I had the chance to kind of sit down on workshops with Ash Moria, so I kind of became my own tool that I like. But look at the various ones and pick ones that suits your organization, and then work with it. Just don't go and spend too long assessing each of them, and just pick one, familiarize yourself, and become an expert at using that single one is probably my my recommendation. Another thing I found over the year, at the beginning I was very gung-ho on like running design sprints, and that's the solution, and that's great. But what I realized when you try to introduce that at kind of at the leadership level for strategy, is that you probably won't convince them from the start on how to kind of to commit 5 days to run a full design sprint, and that's when I came across the lightning decision jam model that I think we've talked about already in the cafe. But and there are templates available on Miro or Mural, depending on which tool you use. But I thought that was probably the best tool that I came across to kind of run quickly through more or less the same steps as a design sprint, but at least you do it in an hour, and it kind of gives a good introduction on kind of design technique that you can use then with your organization to move your strategy forward. So that would be one of the tools that I would probably favor. Of course, if your leadership team is ready to kind of commit 5 days of a design sprint, that would be the ideal. But you can run a succession of lightning decision jam and get good results. And another thing I kept saying and I keep saying is, yes, I know design thinking is not a workshop, and I don't think you can do it, but workshops are important, I think, in an organization. So if you're going to use design thinking technique to develop your strategy and try to have a design mindset in your organization, you need an education kind of model where you might run workshops on design thinking or the tools you're using to build a common language across your organization. And that will help not creating kind of various barriers where your leadership team talks a different language to the rest of the organization. And it also kind of learn by doing. So you can, through those workshops, you can get teams together and adopting your kind of your methods to implement their own kind of strategy or working methodology. And there's a lot more tools that you can use. I mean, there's probably so many, I won't list them all, but there's kind of different problem framing tools that you can use. And you can actually adapt those to strategies. So you can really use those to kind of move your strategy forward or develop it. There's some ideation technique, like how might we, like questions you can use, how might we use design thinking to improve our strategy and kind of start ideating around that. There's the various canvas I talked about. There's a Mad Lib as well, which is kind of a canvas for mission or vision. And I think that works quite well to get a leadership team kind of organized around like a common vision or mission. It might not be the final one, but it gets, again, it frames the conversation quite nicely. And I guess I'll give a few examples on the next slide. And then when it comes time to implementing your strategy, I think that prototyping it on your business model or your business model canvas or whichever canvas you use is a great way to do it. And then I'll never put enough importance on the communication side. So it's one thing to come up with a strategy with using kind of design thinking and getting everybody from your organization involved, but it's really the communication and the seeking the feedback. So to be able to put it through iteration, so you can start talking about your strategy and then modify it as you go along. And I think that that's the important piece. I talked about Mad Libs or Stratlib, as we could call it, for strategy prototyping. So Mad Lib is really, it's where you kind of fill in the blanks. So you have kind of a sentence where there's there's missing words, and then you can fill them in. I think what it does, similarly to the canvas, is it focuses a conversation. So you can have like a very defined Mad Lib where you get a set of words that would guide people in a conversation, or you can have it very simple, you can simplify it. And kind of on the same theme, I think another exercise that I've done with various people is kind of an ideation on your kind of mission statement or your vision. And I think that works quite well. So what you start with, like you divide your group into smaller teams, and you get them to kind of to write a mission statement in no more than 16 words in 16 minutes. And then you all come back together and talk, like everybody talk about what they've generated. And then you give them 8 minutes to reduce it to 8 words. And then you kind of get back down to 4 words. And again, it's a way to get everybody aligned. Like it's a really quick exercise to get everybody aligned on kind of a direction. And then you can start evolving that direction and talking about it in more details. And it kind of sum up, like I said, to Hugo, that the beginning is I've cut a lot of slides from the deck because I wanted to make it in 25 minutes, and I'm just going to see I'm getting to that 25 minutes mark, so or a little bit more. Hopefully you'll have questions and it'll generate a bit of conversation. So I kind of, the 3 things I wanted to talk about really were around what I did in comparing the different models of design thinking, how I kind of visualize how you can apply it to strategy, talk about more tips and tools. People ask me sometimes, how can we follow that through or follow that up. Any pointers? So it's three things you can look at from the beginning. A very short video called The Loop on how IBM has implemented their design thinking. I was talking about it at the beginning, and it surprised me. And actually, it's a great video. I think it's about 15 or 18 minutes, so it's not that long, but it really kind of captures the essence of the transformation they went through to adopt a design mindset in IBM. The article there from Fjord or Accenture, since they acquired it, is another very kind of quick way to get a bit of background on design-led culture. And then a book that I swear by, but Changed by Design is a great book to read to get started as well. And just kind of as a last kind of quote, I think for technology-centric organization, which is the organization again I looked at mostly when I was doing my research, is becoming design mature is not about how designers are organized in your organization, but it's more about how you support the non-designer to think with a design mindset. And on that note, I will shut up now and let other people talk or ask questions or comment or have a coffee, a beer.
Oh, well done. Thank you very much. I have a few comments here. That video from IBM, actually it's from InVision, I think. It's a must. It's a very good video. And one thing I will never forget is IBM's head of design. He was like, don't talk about design thinking, talk about the outstanding outcomes you get by applying these type of methods. And I fully agree with you. If we just mention the word design, people think about graphic design, web design, how it looks. So don't use the word design. I agree with you. Regarding those two methods, so the Lightning Decision Jam and Design Sprint, I think the LDJ is something that everybody should try. In particular, if you guys want to start a movement towards a new way of working, it's a method that can be applied in 45 to 60 minutes. And then maybe you guys can run a design sprint or something equivalent, or a flavor of a design sprint, because everybody adapts a design sprint. And regarding strategy and design, I've been running and facilitating hundreds, not hundreds, but dozens of workshops, in particular after COVID-19, because everybody had to pivot their strategy. And the solution was a structured way to run the meeting, workshop, and Miro. It could be Mural as well, but Miro. So here's a flow, here's a structure, here's a technique to ideate, to diverge, and then to converge. So in fact, I fully agree with you. These techniques can shape a company's strategy and the vision as well, if necessary. Thank you very much. I'm going to mute myself, allowing your others
I think
to
one of the slide I caught was I was talking about human-centered strategy. So putting the human, like putting your organization at the center of your strategy instead of looking it from the top down. So I think that was one of the slides I had cut. But so it's not talking about design, but human-centered strategy or experience-led strategy, or that's how I came to that.
Guys, don't be shy. There's a button called unmute.
Oh yes, can I jump in, please? It's Warren Hayes. I thought that was a fantastic presentation. I really enjoyed that, especially the comparison of the different approaches and frameworks and things like that side by side. Not really seen that done before. I thought that was really a really clever analysis. My question is, my master's was in multidisciplinary innovation. Since then, I'm working more in a marketing capacity, so I'm really interested in marketing. And the interest for me is applying these methods and tools to strategy in marketing. And I think there's a weakness in a lot of organizations around their marketing strategy, that they focus too much on the tactical side of things rather than the diagnosis and the marketing and actually putting together a proper strategy. So it's more a question to anyone else out there. And you say you've done a lot of workshops recently, Hugo. Are you seeing these design tools being applied for a marketing in a marketing space? in terms of, it could be communications planning, but also understanding their users, understanding the category benefits, and planning. It even ties into the creativity of advertising campaigns and things like that, which actually resonate with people and are focused on an actual, a narrative, and telling that narrative.
It's about running experiments, right? To understand what works and what doesn't work. There's a book called Hacking Growth, and they talk about the type of experiments. Let's say I'm going to call it a marketing team, just to simplify, that the marketing team can run to address acquisition, retention, and all of those key metrics that we find in the marketing department or in the growth in the growth team. And that probably comes from design thinking, many of those techniques. Eric, you want to add something?
Thank you.
Yeah, I think it's the getting back to the problem. I think too often, from having worked with marketing, is that they probably assume that they know the problem and they jump straight to kind of trying to solve it, or trying to or someone has solved the problem for them. So it's okay, well, you need to kind of push that solution out, but they don't take the time to understand what came before. And I think, I think if you focus on kind of on techniques like around the 5 whys, or kind of try to drill down, like why are you actually trying to sell that solution, or what problem does it actually solve? And the more you understand the problem, I think that the more your marketing kind of strategy will kind of emerge from that.
Yeah, thank you. I think there's definitely some potential there.
I heard a story last night I was told by a friend of mine. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, Kevin, yes.
That's strange. Last time you couldn't hear anything. My connection was so bad. So I'm glad to hear that. But last night I was told a story just on that marketing side by somebody who works in marketing. And it's in that empathy piece very early on in the design thinking. She was asked to do some market research for a cider drink, and when she sat down with the market research company to do research, I think she was a student and she was going to be paid $20 at the time or something. The question was, do you drink cider, yes or no? And she said no. And the marketing company came along and said, look, we're doing this marketing for Bulmers. Would you put down yes? That's the question. She was going, I don't drink cider. It was, she was making that as a failed opportunity to learn the user's needs, because she said at the AI she didn't drink cider because it's too sweet on it, and maybe they would have that issue, and maybe would have had. I guess just in terms of developing your strategy and getting that sort of empathy piece right, and understanding, feedback that's out there. I thought that was an interesting little insight that they'd lost by telling her to just say you drink cider.
Love it.
Kevin still struggling with the internet connectivity in Ireland.
I'm glad I made it through the presentation without a hitch now, because it was last Friday. It was horrendous. I'm on a 4G modem, so sometimes it just doesn't comply, but it worked well this time.
Kildare is beating Dublin, probably on connectivity. Any more questions, guys?
Okay, this might be a bit of a tangent, but there was just one little thing that I looked at and went, that's really interesting. So if you can indulge me. And I apologize if I missed the first 3 or 4 minutes of this. So I came slightly late to the party as well, which is rude. But you were talking about running a design sprint for strategy. Now I get running a design sprint for a product idea or a piece of software, but how do you handle step 5? Right, if you're going through the kind of map, sketch, etc., and then at the end you test, how do you test particularly a large company's strategy in a design sprint?
There's various ways to do it. You can test, well, you can test it by just talking about it with different parts of the organization without implementing it. So you can try to articulate it in ways, either like a very kind of short document. For me, the lean canvas is the best example. So you map out your strategy on a lean canvas, and you go around your organization and kind of to explain it to people and see, oh yeah, but what did they think about this? What did they think about that? So you don't need to implement it to test it. You can validate it by talking to people. And as you do that, actually people become more involved in the process. And when you kind of get to roll it out, they are off button already, because they feel that they've contributed, or that they've given their opinion, and it's been hopefully considered in rolling out a strategy. So, or if it can be applied to smaller groups, you could test your strategy like with a smaller team within the organization, depending on the size of the organization. Like for large organizations, probably easier to say, okay, we'll start with that department and see how it applies. But if it's a cross-company strategy, it would just walk across the company and present your strategy as not a done deal, but a work in progress.
Okay, cool. Thanks.
There's a question here from Charles Friedman. I don't know if you want to unmute and ask yourself.
Sure, I'm just not in a place where I can shout very loud, but I will give it a go. Yeah, similar to Kevin's question, really. I think the concepts are great and make a lot of sense, but big organizations are complex and fragmented, and typically follow processes that takes months to define a strategy and navigate all the various stakeholders to kind of align around it. I think that conceptually it makes sense that they need to find a way to bridge like the direction they choose to go in, and consistently calibrating it with what they learn and how the world around them changes. But they struggle to do that. And so I was wondering, like, what are your thoughts on how they should change, how they're defining their strategy, that also might inform like how they execute on it?
Yeah, I think from experience, I mean, I completely understand the challenge there. You can't, I mean, if you're a company that has 70,000, 100,000 people, you can't go and talk to every one of them about what they think about your strategy. What I've experienced when I was in Microsoft, and I think I was there in the transition between the Ballmer era and the Satya Nadella era. And there had been a big shift. And I never thought that one person could actually influence a company of 100,000+ people by changing one person at the top. But such an adult is somebody that has a lot of empathy and always kind of plays on that. But all of a sudden, like it was not a strategy that we felt was pushed from the top down, but there had been surveys, there had been kind of a cross sample, like you talk to colleagues that they had been, oh yeah, I've been asked what I thought about this, that, and the other on the direction of Microsoft and the strategy. So yes, it's something that took months, year to kind of to change and to structure. But when it came out, people had felt included and involved already. Not everybody, but I mean, they were open about the process, so that there was the openness there, and you knew you could be asked. There's always ways for you to leave feedback, but they did, I suppose, to go back to the last question, they did test their strategy by talking about it and by running samples with a few individuals across the company at various levels. So that's purely from experience. So what I've experienced when I was there, I've never had to kind of implement a strategy with the company that size, but I've been kind of in the throes of changes.
Cool, thanks. Appreciate it's not an easy answer.
It takes leadership, right? That's the key thing, regardless of the method. with the wrong type of leadership, that method will, yeah, that's
the one, yeah.
Yeah, hit refresh, I think it tells that story.
Yeah.
And he said we moved from a we know it all organization to a we learn it all. So instead of being arrogant, right, we know it all, we know what the client wants, it's about learning, it's about discovery. And that changes everything.
It does, and I was amazed to see the cultural change that operated within a year. I mean, within 6 months, even when he took the helm of the organization, and I was like, hold on, like I'd read the stories about, like, I never worked in Apple, but when Steve Jobs, he had a different leadership style, mind you, but he did like he created a company, left the company, later died, he came back and revived it, and people said, no, it's the one person who did it. I was like, you really? It's the one person can change a company? And then when I saw what Satya did in Microsoft, and like then you see the newspaper headline like Microsoft cool again, and it was a big transformation for a company, and it was one person at the top who kind of orchestrated it all. So I suppose that maybe go back to the Steve Jobs stories and say, okay, well, maybe one person can change an organization and a culture.
And do you think that now the world is more, let's say, prepared or ready to embrace this new way of working because of COVID-19? And everybody's still struggling to figure out if they need to change their strategy, products, services. Is this the year that design thinking and alike methodologies are going to become mainstream, not just in the design or the innovation lab?
It's that's a big question.
No.
Thank you.
Not yet.
Not yet. I think you still need to get out there to kind of to get the full force of the process. And I mean, remote tools are great and they work well. One thing it might do is kind of, I suppose, get people more familiar with the techniques, with the various techniques or the different tools. Like, I mean, the LDJ, I mean, I think has gained in popularity because I think it works, the Lightning Decision Jam. I've heard like where, like 6 months ago, I wouldn't hear much about even design sprints, but also because people are talking about the LDJ, they're talking about design sprints as well. And so I think the knowledge is getting out there. The change, the adoption of it will take probably longer. So I wouldn't say 2020 will be the year of the emergence of design thinking in the popular public. Or
maybe just one small comment on this, because I've been reflecting on listening at whatever you're saying, and thank you for the presentation, Erica. It was really, really interesting. And the thing that I was thinking about is that in this design thinking, there is thinking. And the question that I am really struggling with is what makes us human being so lazy at wanting to really invest in our thinking? And I promise you, it's a true question that I'm asking from my work. I mean, as an executive coach, when you see actually the need today to really stop and get a step back and to think, and how rarely people are willing to take that step. And this is a question actually that I'm thinking about.
I think maybe, well, old habits die hard is probably the first answer I would say. But I think it's because as a society, and it goes back to one of my first slide about speed, is like we do everything at speed, or we try to. And when you want to hit the brakes, it's not comfortable. It's not like you feel like you're wasting time. Although sometimes taking that step back and getting kind of a better understanding of a problem or a situation will fast forward then when you hit the acceleration again. But the hitting the brake part in taking the step back. I think it's just too uncomfortable for people to naturally do. The people want to move forward constantly, even if it's the wrong direction.
I agree, but that's what's puzzling. We brag about the fact that we're the most intelligent species on Earth, but we don't use actually our capacity to think. That's what's puzzling, actually.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, you can see some leaders that different countries elect sometimes, and you wonder where that thinking part goes as well. But without getting too political here.
Yeah, the world is evolving, I think, because in particular because of virus, and leaders need usually a burning platform, a reason to change, or else they will protect the core business and they will exploit that core business. But due to COVID, everybody is changing. So check the website called covidinnovations.com. They have more than 900 examples per sector of companies that pivoted the business model, products, or services. And I guess many are probably applying many of these techniques, but they don't even know that they are applying these techniques. It's a good website to get inspired and probably to promote this way of working inside of your organizations, because examples from government, utilities, not just startups, because people think that only startups are able to change, to pivot, to come up with this type of methodologies. But also legacy organizations are doing these types of things. And there's also, by the way, there's also a good report from the Board of Innovation. I don't know if you guys check that report. It's boardofinnovation.com. They have many examples of innovations that are occurring due to COVID-19. So it seems that without a strong reason, nobody changes. And that's human as well.
Hugo, would you say from a lot of the work you're doing with working with senior teams of large organisations, do you feel that in terms of the approach towards innovation in their strategy, do you think it's that they are intentionally, or what is it actually, to take it from a different angle, people maybe have some negativity towards large organisations, saying that they're maybe not interested in innovation or applying the tools. But do you think it is an intentional thing, or do you think it's just the size of the ships, being, metaphorically, that are less agile? And it's that they obviously have to maintain on where they have their strengths. I'm just wondering how you see it from the psychology of these people, and what their actual problems are as well, and their challenges.
I think people do like to improve. I'm not going to use the word innovation. People like to improve things, and they don't improve as often because of the incentive system. Okay, and that's probably we are talking about the Maslow pyramid. So if I'm going to change something, and that is going to affect my career or my bonus end of the year, I'm not going to change that something. It's not because I don't want to change. It's because I will put myself at risk. Okay, and in large organizations, this is the reality. We can bring all of these methods. Probably we run workshops. It's fun. People really like this. But there isn't a good understanding of where they want to innovate and why and how, because the incentive system is designed for the fiscal year. So we are still in that transition of being able to lead a company for the fiscal year and think about tomorrow and beyond. That's why I think leadership is the only solution. That's why Microsoft was able to become a $1 trillion company, one of the few three, I think, with a new CEO. With Steve Ballmer, it was going down. And another good example, extreme example, is Elon Musk, because the guy is able to make money today. At the same time, his portfolio of companies are about tomorrow and beyond. So the guy said a few days ago, after that successful launch of the Falcon X, the next step, guys, is not to repeat this, because that's already sorted. We know how to do it. The next step is go to Mars. So he is able to, he is an ambidextrous leader, right? Exploiting the core business while exploring beyond the, designing an organization for the future while protecting revenue streams from today. And many leaders were trained just for today, efficiency. It's all about efficiency, and efficiency kills in innovation. But the thing is, with a burning platform, and COVID-19 did that, I see everybody is really trying to do something because they need to, or maybe they won't have a job in 6 months' time or less. So that the burning platform is the trigger for massive change in large organizations. In smaller, it's much easier. That's why I've decided to dedicate my career to corporate innovation in larger organizations, because I think we don't have a solution. It's really hard, and we are all trying to understand how. I can't be more honest than this.
Fantastic, thank you.
I think go back to the one of the resources I gave, like that movie, The Loop, because I mean it's all about changing the cult. Like for a large corporation, it's to change the culture, and that doesn't happen from within a year or within, like it can, but I mean you need to put the system in place as well to make sure that it's followed through. And I was kind of amazed at that process that an organization the size of IBM was ready to kind of invest in and put through. I suppose it just gives you the step that they've taken and why they did it. But yeah, it's a good introduction now to go about it. And
in many organizations will die, will disappear, and that's normal, because there's a life cycle. Okay, they become popular, they become mature, and then they decline and they die. There are many examples, and that's life. You need to accept that as well. Not being pessimistic, but that happens.
Yeah,
new ones will emerge.
New ones will emerge, and that's life as well.
Yeah, it's true. You know, it's like a lot of businesses. Originally, the guy who started it was, or girl, whatever. This person was really creative, you know, dynamic individual that had an outlandish idea, a creative idea, and it took off, you know. And like you say, but then as it grows, it's about the stability, and it slows down over time, and it becomes more about the short term. Indeed, I think it's always interesting to think about that. You know, who was the original founder, and what was their mindset? You know, which then has grown into what is required stability.
Well, I think we are running out of time. And that's good. A lot of questions and excitement. So thanks, Eric. Thank you all. So next week, I hope to see you all here. Check www.innovation.cafe/events for a list of the upcoming events. And by the way, I'm going to add a new one soon. Very famous innovation professor will talk about corporate ventures in many different models. It's going to be interesting because again, we don't know the solution. I think we are all here to learn a bit more about this is a really complex topic, innovation in corporate innovation in particular. Startup innovation is one thing, corporate innovation is a different animal or beast. So thank you all, enjoy your first day. It was a pleasure to host another cafe. Okay, Eric, thanks you very much.
Thanks everybody. Thanks.
Bye guys.
Bye.
Ciao.
Ciao, bye.